At what point did you think, this person has no idea how the real world works? My friend saw a guy get arrested in college. The guy was resisting and yelling at the cops like crazy. Do you know who my father is? He asked the police jokingly. He owns the #1 used car dealership in upstate New York. We were in Massachusetts, they weren't impressed by his inheritance, and they arrested him. The guy sold his rented TV and couldn't understand why the rental center was threatening him with theft charges. On the first day of college, a girl next to me raised her hand, waiting for the dorm supervisor to notice her, and asked what time the cleaners would come to clean our rooms. She made me feel better. I was so worried I'd be the first to do something stupid, but she beat me to it. I was in the army during basic training with a guy who wanted to know what time the maids came to wash dirty laundry and clothes. One guy at my school thought taxes didn't exist, that they were just made up. Recently, I started working in a new job, and in my career orientation class, there was a college graduate. She was confused about income tax and absolutely shocked that she had to pay into Social Security, saying something like, "I thought the government paid for that." She didn't even know what job she was hired for because her father handled all the paperwork. My uncle raised his 2 kids in Hong Kong, banning them from watching TV, using public transportation, or being outside alone at any time. They spend their days at an international school for English speakers only, and after school, they come home and read English books. Once, we had a family gathering, and I realized these kids grew up in Hong Kong, but they don't speak Chinese, they don't know how to use public transportation, they have no friends, and they don't know what's happening in the world outside their school and home. They're just very uncomfortable around people in general. This year, they'll turn 18. These 2 kids have no clue what the outside world is like. One day, I was talking with my cousin, and I mentioned that I'm terrible at navigating. Meanwhile, my brother could be dropped in a cornfield and find his way home. She replied that finding directions is easy, just remember the children's rhyme, a flock of young angry wolves, and you'll know where north is. I laughed and said that's for remembering directions in order, not for figuring out which way is which. We argued for 20 minutes until I asked her to show me how it works. She stands up, points forward, says, "A flock of young angry wolves," and indicates the direction she's facing is north. Then I told her to turn to face me and find north again. She does it, says, "A flock of young angry wolves," points at me, and says, "This is north." I asked her if north had changed. She said no, but north was over there a minute ago. She looked confused and said, "Why didn't it work?" I told her it's because she's an idiot. I got into an accident in high school. I was driving a car that cost me $300, an old junker, but I fixed it up and bought wheels. I was absolutely devastated. The guy who hit me didn't care at all and kept saying his father would buy him another one. Why was I so worried about my old car? When his father came to pick him up, it turned out this was the 3rd car his kid had totaled that school year. My brother wanted to become a game designer. I asked how things were going and what he'd been working on. Our mom went to the nearest supermarket to buy art supplies so he could start designing. He didn't know what coding was in terms of game design and didn't know graphic design. He thought he could just draw a few balls, guns, and scoreboards, and someone would pay him for it, and he'd make a living with 0 experience. By the way, he's almost 30. We went with a friend to a metal music festival and set up a tent there. We had just woken up when she pulled out a hair straightener and asked where the outlets were. When I told her there were no outlets at the campsite, she looked at me in horror and said, "So I can't straighten my hair for 3 days?" I'm in graduate school in Barcelona, and in my class, there are 2 Colombian girls who, I'm almost certain, have never had to work for anything in their lives. The other day, we had our first exam, and the test was tough. I thought it was pretty straightforward. It was multiple choice questions, and you had to rely on what we discussed in class to answer each question. A few minutes into the exam, one of the girls raises her hand and says she doesn't know what to do. The professor tells her to use the topics we discussed in class to answer the questions. She said she didn't know how to do that. I couldn't understand why it was so hard for her. Then the other Colombian girl says, "Can you just write on the board the topics you want us to use for the answers?" Essentially, she asked the graduate school professor to answer her question. Then the professor gave her a few hints. 20 minutes later, she raises her hand again and asks, "Can you read what I wrote and tell me if I failed or if I should rewrite the answer?" My dad asked if he could borrow my cat. I said no. He replied, "No big deal, I'll just rent a cat." I didn't bother explaining that you can't rent cats, it's not a thing. I still don't know why he needed a cat. My friend decided to quit his job to become a Twitch streamer. I immediately thought it was a dumb idea, but what really shocked me was how he planned his streaming career. He told me he had saved enough money to cover his bills for 1 month, and after that, he'd be making enough money on Twitch to pay his bills. He genuinely believed that within 1 month, he'd have 200 to 300 subscribers. He refused to buy ads or use any social media for promotion. He didn't play AAA games or even popular games. A year and a half later, he lost his apartment, his car, pretty much everything except his girlfriend, who he lives with. But he just hit 50 subscribers on Twitch and became a partner, which for him was a huge success. I was working at a barista one day. A customer ordered a drink through the drive-thru window, about $5. While talking on the phone, he scraped some change from the corners of his car and handed me less than $3. I kept looking at him with my hand outstretched, holding a pile of dirty coins, and he just shrugged and said, "That's all I have." I repeated the total and said he hadn't given me enough. He said, "Can't you just cover it from your tips?" Excuse me? Cover it from my own pocket? I was outraged but just apologized and said I couldn't do that. He snapped at me, saying I wasn't being very friendly, and I apologized again, explaining that I rely on my tips to, eat. Instead, he yelled at me again, saying, "You're awful, this place is awful," before driving off. Recently, a college friend told me he got his first car. I was really happy for him and asked what he was going to do with it. The conversation went like this: him, "I don't know, maybe go for a drive, see the sights." Me, "Sounds cool, but how are you going to fuel it?" Him, "What do you mean?" Me, "You don't have a job, and your parents don't give you much money, so what are you going to do when your car runs out of gas? I swear to God, this is what he said, "That's not a problem. All I need to do is find a pipeline in the backyard, dig it up, take some oil, fill some cans, and keep them in the trunk in case I need to fill the tank." I stared at him awkwardly for a minute, his innocent blue eyes piercing my soul, and then told him I had to go. One acquaintance once said, "I don't understand homeless people. Just buy a house." A spoiled rich kid who has no idea how money is earned. He's never had a job, never done hard work in his life, and is barely hanging on in college. In a national park, a ranger says, "Stay on the trails, there are bears in this area." One lady says, "Isn't that dangerous? Why aren't they in their cages?" "Ma'am, we're not in a zoo." A young girl I worked with at Target was scheduled for a shift from 6 a.m. to 2:30 p.m., but she regularly showed up between 8 and 9 a.m. with no valid explanation. After about her third tardy, our supervisor asked if she had morning responsibilities, like getting kids ready for school, that required a later shift. If so, she could be moved to an 8 a.m. to 4:30 p.m. shift. Her response? "No, I still want to leave at 2:30. I just don't want to get up that early." She was fired when she refused to acknowledge that you can't show up to work whenever you want. My boss told me about his friend who shared a life hack. She received bills in the mail, didn't pay them, and waited a couple of months. Then she'd cry to the collectors to get them to waive the fees because she missed the payments. That was her brilliant life hack. When I was at military camp, some guy sent a letter addressed to Miami with no address. I was about to say that's not so dumb for a really young kid, but then I realized you said military camp, not summer camp. A part-time student worker in my university lab came into my office and asked, "So, can I eat what's in the fridge?" I didn't know I was supposed to bring my own lunch. I looked at him, stunned, and said, "Nothing. People brought that food for their own lunches, but you can call for food delivery and order something." It took 4 tries for him to understand he couldn't eat other people's lunches. A month later, he was fired for stealing chloroform. My ex-wife demanded to know where I was going on vacation and with whom. I had to explain to her for the 871st time what divorce means. My mom spontaneously showed up in the city where I live and asked me to meet her for dinner. I told her I was taking the bus and it would take me 45 minutes to get to her, even though it's a 15-minute drive by car. She said, "Just tell the bus driver to bring you here." My mom has no idea how public transportation works. I was having lunch with a friend in our second year of college. Being poor students, we chose the cheapest food in the mall. When we finally sat down, he expressed relief that his credit card would reload in a week. I was a bit confused, so I asked him to explain. He thought banks give cards to everyone who applies, give them X dollars a month, and then reload them at the end of the month. I had to explain to a 20-year-old grown man that credit cards don't work that way. Be sure to subscribe to our channel so you don't miss new, super interesting discussions. Become our patron via the link in the description and listen to our episodes in the background without ads or censorship, as well as exclusive spicy episodes that didn't make it to YouTube due to platform censorship. In the meantime, we suggest checking out our other videos.